Okay, so in this part of the PDO series, we're going to look at something slightly more complicated and probably slightly harder to grasp the concept or the overall concept of, and that is transactions. Now, by all means, we're not looking into any advanced transactions. I'm going to create a very basic example with inserting into a database table and rolling back if there's any problems with any of the queries. And that's essentially what transactions are. So what we need to do in order to start using transactions is to actually understand them. So I'm going to go ahead and outline what we might do in some situation. I'm going to use a try and catch block, as we've already looked at in within the last couple of parts of this series, and we're going to catch a PDO exception, and here we'll throw output error. In here we'll throw an exception. So what do? Well, the first thing we do is we start a transaction. And what this will do is we use the begin transaction method. We use the query method, or we prepare and then execute queries. However, we're not actually performing these queries. So we could do query 1, query 2, query 3. What we've not done is actually apply these to the database table yet. So for example, if we were inserting or deleting, we wouldn't actually be, applying these changes. However, we only can apply the changes when we commit to the changes. Now, why do we do this? What's the point? What's the point in starting a transaction, querying a few times, and then committing the changes? Well, the point is this: catching any problems that we have. Now, within here, what we can do is, as well as outputting the error, we don't even have to output the error, we can actually roll back the changes that we've done. So for example, we start the transaction, we perform query 1, let's say that this is a success. Query 2, let's say this is also a success, but query 3, let's say query 3 fails. Now if query 3 fails, but it depends on query 1 and query 2 being successful, we can catch the exception, roll back all of these queries, well, these two queries because this one's failed, and then we can output an error or do something. So basically it's a way of instead of chaining down loads of if statements, in fact even that wouldn't work, because we would actually be applying changes. So if we were just using like MySQL query, or just using the PDO statement query method, we'd actually be applying these. But by starting a transaction, we're building up these, and then we're committing our changes when we're happy. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a very basic example here, and I'm going to be sort of causing an error, and then you'll see that the queries that I sort of build up in this transaction aren't applied. This isn't really going to be a very useful example, but it's going to give you an idea of how this works. So the first thing we need to do to enable exceptions to be thrown, we need to set attributes from our PDO class. So I'm going to say db set attribute, and the attribute I'm going to set is the PDO error mode, and I'm going to set this to PDO exception. So this needs to be attribute error mode. And if we come over to our browser, yep, that all looks good. Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is we are going to be starting the transaction first of all, beginning the transaction first of all, and this is from the PDO object. So we need to say db begin transaction, like that. Okay, so we go ahead and refresh, nothing's happened, but basically this now allows us to query but not actually apply these queries, or the actions that these queries would take until we commit. So for example, if I just go ahead and I nearly type MySQL query then, if I was to say db query delete from articles. Now normally what this would do is it would delete everything from the articles table. Let's just go over to it here. So we've got our articles table here, we've got 20 rows in total. Usually this would delete from articles. So if I hit enter and then go over to my articles table, nothing has been deleted. So although we have done this, we've begun a transaction, but we haven't yet committed. So that's an example of how that can work. Okay, what we're actually going to be doing here is we're going to be performing two queries. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of these, and I can put that down there. So the two queries, the first one's going to insert a new record. The second one's going to make use of the last inserted ID, and it's going to update a new column that we're going to create with a view count. Now, I know this doesn't make much sense because we could, if we have a new column, we could just insert, you know, another value, but you know, that's not the point. The point of the tutorial is to demonstrate this. So I'm going to go ahead, hit the structure tab in PHP I'm going to go over and I'm going to click go here. Let me just do that a bit too fast. So I'm going to insert a new column at the end of the table, and this column is going to be called views. I'll leave that at int. So save, browse, and all of these are by default 0. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be inserting a new record, grabbing the new ID, which I assume is going to be 21. It'll be the next record along, and then we're going to update this in a separate query, and we're going to set the view count to this new record to 1, 2, 3, whatever really. So the first is going to be an insert into articles, and we want to update articles dot, or insert into articles dot title, and the values here, or the value will just be another PDO tutorial. Okay, so this query here is going to insert that. Obviously at the moment when we hit enter here, nothing's inserted. So the second is going to make use, like I said, of the PDO object's last insert ID method, which is going to return the last inserted ID. So in this case we're going to update articles set articles dot view equal to 1, where articles dot ID is equal to, and then on the end here we're going to append concatenate the the value returned from last insert ID method. Okay, so this will work when we commit it, but what if we, you know, throw an exception? Then we'll roll back. So we'll learn how to do that in just a moment. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to db commit. So at the moment, if I run this, it's going to work, and it will actually commit our changes, these two changes here. And because we haven't thrown any exceptions, and we certainly haven't rolled back anything, then this will hold true. So let's just go ahead and do that anyway, and we'll go and undo this in just a moment. So here we now have let's just check the code. There we go, views. Okay, so if I'd actually have implemented the rollback and the output error, then obviously this wouldn't have executed, this wouldn't, and we would have rolled back the changes and output the errors. So that just again proves how this can be useful. So I'm going to go ahead, hit enter and browse. We've got 21 in total. This new record's been inserted and the view count's been updated to 1. So we know that works. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this, and I'm going to just change the so I'll just delete that. Right, so that's deleted. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be rolling back if there's a problem with this. So in that case, I had the S off of a views, and that would just roll back the changes, wouldn't commit anything. So here we go. So db roll back. So we're using the rollback method from the PDO object, and now we're going to just go ahead and output an error, which is the get message method from this exception that's been thrown. So let's just go ahead and reset the counter here. Let me just go back to articles. We're on 21, just not to confuse. Okay, so I'm going to purposely just take off this S, hit enter, and this message has been returned from the PDO exception that has been thrown. And inside of articles, we don't have this new record in here. Now, again, as we've already seen, if I was to change this to views and then hit enter, everything goes well, and we create this new row. Okay, and we can do that again, and that will create a new row there, one again. So, for example, if you were depending on perhaps a piece of data within one of these queries, and that data didn't quite match up, and there was a problem, you can output an error message. Obviously not this kind of error message, but you may have some custom message, and you'd be able to roll back the changes. So transactions are just one of them things that can get extremely complicated. There's different things that you can do with this, and there's a lot more advanced things. This is a very, very basic introduction, but essentially that's it. So we have looked at a very basic example of beginning a transaction, querying twice, and committing unless we throw an exception. If we do throw an exception, we roll back the changes, and we don't create this first or query, don't execute this first query, because we need to update in the second based on the first query's data. So essentially that's it for an introduction to transactions with PDO.